Assalamu alaikum, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Law and Security, I would like to welcome my esteemed panelists for our webinar today. We will be discussing loss and damage and its significance for Pakistan and the decision that was reached in COP27 to establish a fund. We have two panelists. Amongst them, we have Major General retired Asghar Nawaz, who was an ex-chairman NDME, has been a secretary of the National Disaster Management, has also represented Pakistan's delegation as a negotiator on loss and damage in COP21 and COP22. We have with us Ahmed Rafay, who is an environmental lawyer, a Yale World Fellow, partner at Salim Alam & Co., member Punjab Environmental Protection Council. And we are also joined with our Executive Director, Himan Azhar. We would like to commence this webinar, and assalamu alaikum to everyone. I would like to start by talking, sir, General Saab, मैं आपसे पहला question करना चाहूँगी. Pakistan has done a great job in negotiating for the loss and damage after the horrific floods that Pakistan witnessed. आपकी opinion में, sir, in the future, once this funding is approved for Pakistan and Pakistan gets this funding eventually, what do you think would be the first course of action? Would it be restoration, rehabilitation, or prevention?
Thank you very much. We first need to actually understand what is the loss and damage, and whatever has been decided in COP27, it has a past, it has a history. So loss and damage, something that the loss is something that is not recoverable, and damage is something which is recoverable or it is repairable. Now, when the discussion on this very aspect started about 30 years ago in the United Nations framework for climate change, this point came from some of the least developed countries and the small island countries, which could face an extinction because of the high, the sea level rise, that they were all going under the sea. So one point of time, they thought that they are not going to recover from it and there will be displacements. But when this topic was debated upon, it was always in the mind of the developed countries, because you understand that the greenhouse gas emissions, which resulted into the present state of climate change, is because whatever in the industrial era that started in the earlier part of the last century, that this temperature, because of these greenhouses, industrialization, rapid industrialization started trapping in the environment, and the temperature started increasing. So the developed countries always feel that they will be held liable for this, and if some compensation is demanded on account of the loss and the damage which has been suffered by the other countries, they will have to pay for it. So they've always been avoiding this topic. And that is why when in Paris climate change, this was one of the most contentious articles, which at times would go out of the agreement, and then it was again included, and when last point it was included in a very truncated form, with a very clear mention of this thing, that by inclusion of loss and damage in here, there's not going to be any claim for, or it must not be construed that it has got some relevance to the liability and compensation. So after that, there have been a lot of efforts on part of the developing countries, especially the least developed countries, and the countries which are vulnerable to climate change, like Pakistan. We are amongst the first 10 for almost last 2 decades. So they have been pushing it forward that there should be a fund for, when you must understand that if you are not able to cope up or adapt to climate change, then that means you have to face the consequences of this thing. And there are certain things in which you cannot fight with all the technology, with all the investment that you made for adaptation or mitigation to climate change. So there is something residual which is left, and that results into the impacts of loss and damage. So this push forward started from the Glasgow, CLOP, which was held last year, And then this point was an interim agenda in Pakistan because of what happened to the country in this year, was able to push it forward and it came onto the table. So now here we stand that while the world community has agreed to have a fund established, there are fundamental questions to be answered. From where will the financing come? This is a very important question because even for the commitments which were made for the Green Climate Fund and for the Adaptation Fund and mitigation, that there is a huge gap after Paris climate change agreement. They have not been able to meet that. So where will the funds come from? Then what will be the disbursement mechanism of these funds? How will they be disbursed? And the third thing is, who will have a claim to get these funds? These three fundamental questions remain unanswered. And as of now, in March, there will be a transitional committees meeting as a follow-up of COP27, where they're going to debate these very aspects and they're going to present it in the next COP, that is COP28. They will going to present its findings. Having said that, people are talking of innovative financing. The Secretary General of UN, he talked in September this year that there should be some sort of a levy on these oil-producing, companies and the countries, from which, whatever you generate, that should come into this fund. Or for that matter, like in the aviation industry, if you can put on certain sort of a levy for this, and whatever you accumulate should come and form part of this fund. But it has to be. It is still very hazy. It's the question is that it took 30 years for this point to come to this point, from this agenda to come to this place, and now hereafter, how do we move to ensure its realization? And when it comes to us, to Pakistan, again, because the mechanism, when it will be decided that for what purpose it's going to be used. When a disaster happens, the first finances you are needed are for the rescue and the relief mission. You take the people out, put them into the camps. So it's more of a humanitarian aid. After that starts the process of rehabilitation and reconstruction, which requires a phenomenal investment. First, you carry out an assessment and then you do for it. And the value for money is because those estimates are made in the present. So if we have estimated that we require $40 billion or $20 billion for reconstruction, that is an estimate for today. If we start getting this money after about 2 years, maybe this cost will increase.
Cheek.
So following on this, I would like to refer to my follow-up question with Sir Rafay. So just like General Saab ne mentioned here about the funding and the amount of funding that would be needed, जिस तरह से UN ने एक अंदाजा लगाया था कि Pakistan might need $816 million, out of which only about $9 were dispersed. So उसी हिसाब से, like General Saab mentioned, हमको Pakistan को, how will we get that chunk of money? Will we get it in time? Do you think we will actually get it in time? Help ourselves and help Pakistan to avoid a further disaster probably next year?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me.
Sir, I think you're muted.
Well, let's be clear that this summer is the coolest summer for the rest of our lives. The summer that we experienced this year, the heat waves, the unprecedented global heat waves that we experienced this year are just the coolest summer for the rest of our lives. This global warming is very much here. And when people ask about where the climate finances are, let me explain to you how that question reflects perhaps a lack of understanding of the severity of the climate crisis. The Secretary General of the United Nations made a call for humanitarian relief after the floods in Pakistan this year. And as you mentioned, it was increased to about $800 million. Just may say, एक fraction निकला है. But just a few years ago, when the Notre Dame burnt down in the French city of Paris, over $1 billion was donated over the course of a week. 2020, during the pandemic lockdown, saw the largest movement of capital in world history, with all the subsidies and bailouts that governments were giving to private sector. The war in Ukraine costs money. The war in Afghanistan cost money, billions and trillions of dollars. So the money is there, very much so. It's just that the people who have it are loath to give it to anyone. As Nawaz Saab was explaining, no one wants that guilt of attribution associated with them, that their countries or their economies are somehow responsible for the state many countries in the world are suffering from right now. Now, I just want to add one more thing, that this loss and damage fund, although there are many questions that need to be answered for it to become implementable, it is a global effort. As Nawaz Saab was explaining, it's small island states and vulnerable countries of the last 2 decades who've been pointing out the failure of the global north to comply with their commitments to mitigate global greenhouse gases. Their failure in doing so is the reason why Pakistan suffered these floods. There's an attribution paper that was published this summer after the floods by Imperial College London, where they found that about 75% of the intensity of these monsoon rains that fell over Pakistan were directly caused by the 1-degree temperature increase by global warming. So we know very much that this is a man-made disaster. This is not a natural phenomenon. And it's science like this attribution paper, as it gets better, will be able to resolve some of the questions of which countries are supposed to pay into this loss and damage facility and how much. And then the mechanisms of making them pay, and these are still questions that are outstanding. And at the same time, I agree with retired Major General Saab that transparency is necessary for the countries that claim these loss and damage facilities as well. Just a few weeks before Pakistan went to attend the COP at Sharm el Sheikh, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister were in a desert in Tharparkor inaugurating a coal-fired power plant. You can't be doing this on the one hand and then claiming that you want climate loss and damage facility on the other. So countries like Pakistan, countries like Nigeria, that was also devastated with floods this year, Philippines with hurricanes, have to evolve transparent frameworks so that people can see that these loss and damage facility monies are going to the right communities and are being distributed in the right way. I need to point out that just a few weeks ago, there was a photograph in the newspapers of a political rally in Balochistan where the tenting was all UN rehabilitation tenting. These sorts of things can't happen as well. And so countries like Pakistan have to look within to improve their own governance.
Absolutely. Rafay, so I think this is a very pertinent point. But as far as we understand this issue, हमने देखा है कि international forums पे climate change has been very much part of the activism in Western capitals as well. There's part of becoming the pop culture as well. Some celebrities are also propagating the cause. So जब इतना आपको causes हैं, मतलब अगर हम कश्मीर cause के लिए कहें तो पैसे जमा करना मुश्किल है. But if we say कि okay fine, we're raising money for climate change, then it might not be that difficult. So why do you see less chances and less money being raised अगर हम पाकिस्तान जाकर जो है वो या इन countries को, developing countries को climate change से लड़ने के लिए जो है वो पैसे चाहिए? You still see there is a problem with that?
जी देखिए, climate change is everyone's problem, and countries like Pakistan have a limited response and governance understanding of the subject. There's no subnational climate governance, and many of the climate resilience and adaptation projects that we have to do in agriculture and irrigation and in transport and in energy are all very much subjects of provincial domain. And there's no governance here because there's no, you could say, political focus or civil society focus on these issues. And I wish it was the case, very much so. And it isn't something that's, pop culture. This is the younger generation deeply concerned of the future of the human civilization and indeed the rest of their lives. So what you're beginning to see now is a better expression of concern by younger people of their futures. And I'm sorry, there's also reportage coming out of the United States and I think the European Union at the time of COP that a majority of young people actually believe that their state should be giving into the loss and damage facility on account of their own sort of implicit contribution of greenhouse gases over the course of centuries. So we're beginning to see a change in political attitudes on this. And I think that on a global level, this idea of global climate justice is getting stronger, where the voices of the global south are being articulated better. And there is a system, well, not a system, voices of accountability towards the global north are getting stronger. And I think this is just going to be part of what our discourse is going to be mainstream.
हमारी ये जो अभी तक की डिस्कशन हुई है इसमें दो प्रॉब्लम्स आइडेंटिफाई हुए हैं. एक तो हमें प्रॉब्लम बाहर है कि बाहर जब पैसे जमा करने हैं या इकट्ठे करने हैं, फंडिंग किसने करनी है, दैट इज प्रॉब्लम नंबर 1. द अदर प्रॉब्लम इज कि हमने अपना जो है अब अकाउंटेबिलिटी और ट्रस्ट विद द डोनर जो है वो किस तरह से डेवलप कर रहे हैं. तो जनरल साहब, सिंस आप एनडीए में को चेयर करते रहे हैं, ये जो अकाउंटेबिलिटी और ट्रस्ट वाला एंड देन टेकिंग द ट्रस्ट टू द अदर पार्टनर्स जिन्होंने जो है वो इस पूरी एफर्ट को, पूरी एक्सरसाइज को जो है वो फंड करना है, where do you see the gaps and how can we actually improve those gaps कि हम ये जो अपना क्लाइमेट जस्टिस का केस है, we can strengthen our case and cause there.
Thank you, Raman. Raman, I was also the chairman of ERA. I had a dual hat. So ERA, when I had taken over ERA, it was in 2016, and 2005 the earthquake had happened. At that particular time, 11 years past the line, the donors' fatigue had set in, and ERA was still not moving, although it had a lot to its credit, but there were so many projects which remained unfinished. Now, we must understand that when you are making the claims, what Ahmed Saab had actually very rightly pointed out, whenever this mechanism is going to be operationalized, there would be certain questions or certain conditions may be associated with it. That how much are you going to do, or what efforts are being done at the national level for the mitigation and adaptation? Are you serious toward the climate change so that you could have minimized this loss and damage which has occurred to you? Merely pursuing the claim that we have an emission level of less than 1%, and because of our geographical location, we are a victim of it. This case is presented over there by so many countries. And there are countries like these small island states that they present their case in a very effective manner, direct loss. But there's a non-economic loss, so that after a while, our island, no one would know the name of this island because we would have submerged. So where would we go? We would sensitivity. Such like cases is much more than sensitivity to a country where the people could find that there are governance issues, there are transparency issues, and there are gaps in development. So while we'll have to, and there's another aspect to it, please. For the Green Climate Fund, there is a system of accreditation, and there are certain, you need to have an accreditation, and then these funds are released. And in Pakistan, I think it's 2 UN agencies and 1 GS bank in the private sector. And as compared to us, what we have been able to claim up till now, vis-a-vis in South Asia, Bangladesh or India, they have been able to get more pie from that fund. So whenever the mechanism is going to be established, I'm sure this mechanism is also going to be tight-jacketed. It will have certain conditions, and it will require certain enabling environment for a country to do this. And as of now, I feel that the mechanism that we adopt amongst ourselves, it has a lot of gaps in the processes, in the transparency. of doing the
But
thing.
इसके बाद तो मेरा ख्याल है the Prime Minister offered कि हम international firm से audit करवा लेते हैं. So do you think कि ये confidence building measures जो हैं वो या इस तरह के और confidence building measures हो सकते हैं?
देखें, ये बात सिर्फ ऑडिट तक नहीं है, क्योंकि ये जो फंड्स आते हैं, इन फंड्स को अगर आपने रिहेबिलिटेशन, रिकंस्ट्रक्शन, ये लाइन डिपार्टमेंट्स यूज करते हैं, और ये फिर डेफिनेटली जब मल्टीपल प्रोविंसेस हों तो वहां पे मल्टीपल तरीके से हमारे कुछ इनहेरेंट फ्लॉज हैं हमारी ट्रेंडिंग में, कॉन्ट्रैक्टिंग प्रोसीजर्स में, मॉनिटरिंग में और प्रोग्रेस ऑफ वर्क्स के ऊपर. सो either they will have to be a international monitor to ensure that these funds are utilized in a manner that they are demanded for, और इसके अलावा एक और चीज भी है, the assessments have to be very accurate. Whatever you actually ask for it, that is also going to be subjected to some sort of a monitoring. जो मैंने आपको बताया है कि ग्रीन क्लाइमेट फंड के ऊपर भी जो उनका जो एक्रीडेशन का प्रोसेस है और उसके बाद जो फंड्स की अप्रूवल्स है, रिलीजेस हैं, सब कुछ वो they demand lot of professional efficiency.
ठीक, राइट. मैं दो चीजें यहाँ पर राफे आलम साहब आपसे पूछना चाहता हूँ. आई थिंक वन ऑफ द इशू इज नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग. और केस कोई भी हो, सिंस यू आर अ लॉयर, नैरेटिव्स आर आल्सो वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. अभी तो क्योंकि मैंने ये वाले फ्लड भी कवर किए हैं 2013, 14 एंड बैक इन 2009 भी जो है वो कवर किए थे, बट इस दफा वी वर लकी कि हमारे दरियाओं में उतना पानी नहीं आया, ये बारिशों का फ्लड था. अदरवाइज थिंग्स could have been even worse. तो ये जो हमारा नैरेटिव है, where do you see the gaps? Are there any gaps? और उसके अंदर ये जो कि पाकिस्तान as a country, हमने अपने आप को एक पिच किया है as a country, one of the most affected countries. Do you think कि इसके अंदर कोई और हम बेहतरी लेकर आ सकते हैं in order to fight a case? And secondly, it's also a legal issue, 18th amendment वाला issue. ये बार बार रेज होता है. इस दफा भी जब फ्लड्स में हम गए, they said that there is no fixing of responsibility of getting things done, as well as, और यही जो हम बात कर रहे हैं कि रेस्क्यू तो चले हम कर लेते just hold on. Zara is joining. Ji, sorry. So Rafi Alam sir, let me just put that question again. हम वहीं से फिर आप अपना जवाब शुरू कीजिएगा. Two things: narrative and then 18th amendment or any legal changes needed.
Ji, thank you. Well, as far as narrative is concerned, Pakistan's narrative has been fairly consistent at the COPs, that we're incredibly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, both because of our geographical vagaries and also because of our own misgovernance and also because of our own poverty. That we have many success stories, you know, there are things that Pakistan can be looked at in a positive light: the conservation of forests, the conservation of species, in the increase in number of national parks and things like that. And then at the same time, we say, "Hame paise dein so that we can increase or upgrade these things and protect ourselves." This year, however, was different. These floods came and hit Pakistan dramatically hard. It's still sort of, I live in Lahore, and it's kind of counterintuitive for me to understand that there were at one point as many as 30 million Pakistanis without a home, without food, shelter. And still now dozens of millions of Pakistanis who are still facing this winter without appropriate shelter. It's staggering. And some of the figures that we've heard about, you know, this 100-kilometer lake that's developed, completely things that seem to be out of science fiction. put Pakistan in the position almost as the poster child for loss and damage.
Hmm.
I mean, do remember there are other countries who have been advocating this at least since the late 1990s, early 2000s. And I think it was the Secretary General of the United Nations coming here and sort of taking Pakistan along, and the Ministry of Climate Change responding so well. And I think at some levels, the stars aligned, because at the same time, at UN level, Pakistan began chairing G77 plus China last December. The term runs out just in a few days, actually. And it was at this position that at the UN that our ambassador there, Munir Akram Saab, managed to get loss and using G77, got loss and damage put onto the agenda of this COP. And then Ambassador Munir Nabil, representing the negotiators in COP and leveraging G77, Pakistan was able to move the responsibility or take this responsibility and execute it very well. And of course, there are many questions left over there. And as far as narrative building is concerned, yes, there's a lot of narrative building. The Pakistani Ministry of Climate Change has to invest in loss and damage, because so far our sort of focus areas when we go there is adaptation and funding, sort of climate funding. We need to diversify our interests at the COP level so that we continue to have dedicated negotiators on loss and damage and on other subjects as well. But as you mentioned, the 18th Amendment devolves many governance subjects to the provinces. And if you look at the federal legislative list, climate change is not on it. Yet we have a Ministry of Climate Change because of the amount of international environment and climate agreements that we've signed that we have to report to their various secretariats. But the subject of governance on climate change, what you're supposed to do to adapt your agriculture, to make your infrastructure more resilient, your cities more heat sensitive, these are very much essential subjects and not the domain of the Ministry of Climate Change. And for that, at the policy level, the provinces of KPK and Sindh have evolved their own provincial policies. KPK in line with Pakistan's 2012 national policy, and Sindh a little bit more independently. But it's concerning to think that Pakistan's largest province, that has a population of over 100 million people, Punjab, which is the backbone of our agriculture, doesn't have its eyes open on any forms of climate governance. We have, for example, unlivable air pollution, and most air pollution is greenhouse gases, and yet absolutely no sense of what to do about it.
And it's been there for last 20 years, or 20 saal se ek mulk mein ek issue chal raha hai, and we are unable to fix it.
So what we're missing on a policy level, actually, it's not just climate subjects, not just environment subjects, but I think many subjects where Pakistan has signed international agreements, be they for labor, for health, for children's rights. We have no mechanism at the federal level that collects the federal or the federal commitments on these international obligations to provincial governance. You see? And this is something that we need to work on, because many times Islamabad goes and signs on documents that the provinces don't know about. Pakistan's committed to a 40% decrease in greenhouse gases, but if you go to speak to the Punjab Transport Department or the Industries Department, they don't know what greenhouse gases are, because no one sat down and told them.
अच्छा, अब ये क्योंकि I think Zara की तरफ से जो वो message आ गया कि we must head towards conclusion. जी Zara, go ahead.
This has been a fruitful discussion. I think हमारे पास बहुत कुछ है बात करने के इन topics पे, and if you start to try to get to a conclusion, we can take hours. So I would just move forward for concluding remarks. General साहब, अगर आप थोड़े से हमको concluding remarks going forward, if you'd like to say a few words.
Well, I'd just like to say that our case is very strong. In every COP, there is a non-governmental organization, German Watch, which releases its report, in which the rating of countries vulnerable to climate change is presented. We remain there because of our mass. We have such a huge population mass, and then the sort of events which have happened and the sort of damage that we have suffered. So we have a very good case there. Now, the important thing is that our networking in taking this cause forward, we are on the center stage, that we have been able to pursue this agenda very effectively in COP27. So we just need to reinforce our claim. And along with that, we have to make certain, significant and noticeable measures that we are capable of utilizing this whatever we received, and we have the cases available to us to our credit.
Right.
Our reconstruction of 2010 and 2005 was good. Some part of it were very good. And we need to protect our case to strengthen our claim. And we must also make those mechanisms that we should be able to have a very good pie from this fund as and when it materializes.
Right. Okay, आपने maths वाली बात बड़ी जबरदस्त की. I mean, they can love us, they can hate us, but they cannot ignore us.
Ji, sir. Sir, Rafay, if you would like to kindly give your opinions on how Pakistan just continuing General Saab's vision.
Thank you very much. No, I certainly think that Pakistan needs to maintain the momentum that it's managed to generate by increasing the capacity at the Ministry of Climate Change, having more dedicated negotiators to go to these COPs, and at the same time to evolve a mechanism between the Federation and the federating units for the implementation of international agreements where the subject matter of these international agreements are in the provincial domain. So these are two areas that I think focus is definitely needed.
Thank you, everyone.
So thank you so much on behalf of Center General Saab and Rafay Alam Saab. I must thank you for your time. And it was, I think there's so many issues. It's probably a learning experience for us or dekhne walon ke liye bhi. So thank you so much once again for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.